The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me today because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection, esteem, approval, and pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and God's action within.
Amen.
Anybody else need to pray this out loud?
I need a tattoo.
Yeah.
No kidding.
So right.
Oh, boy, what a lot.
That's why we say it every day and we try to live into it. And as we go through what, you might get a feeling of what Thomas Keating's faith stage was. Right? Right? He's praying this prayer out of the place where he is and his understanding of what his faith is about.
I'd say he's pretty mature.
I'd say very mature faith.
Well beyond me.
Yeah. I don't think that's necessarily true.
Well,
That, I think it is our desire.
it's our
to sort of
desire, and it was
categorize.
his desire, he couldn't do it either.
No, that's what the prayer came from, didn't it?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, Thomas Keating talks about his experience of going to the monastery, wanting to be the best monk ever. That was his whole thing. And he was. He wanted to fast better and pray better and kneel longer and do more chores and, you know, read more books and all that. And
Well, that was his purpose in life.
maybe, at least he was able to impart that to us about what he learned about that through his, in community with his fellow monks. That's where he gained his wisdom, in prayer and in community. So thank God for Thomas Keating. He's in the now the, you know, the great cloud of witnesses. Yeah. Okay, week 2, there is a piece of paper. Everybody have a piece of paper now that says week 2. Nice. So, okay. If you turn this page over that has the prayer on it,
That document, that is supposed to actually.
the page with the prayer, turn it over.
Here too. They do.
We now have it if anyone needs.
Just set it right in front
I
of
think
you.
we're good.
Did you get one?
Yep.
All right. Turn over that first sheet that has Thomas Keating's welcome prayer. This is my notes from last Thursday, where when I asked you what is faith, and then this is, you know, this is what I heard. Is there any way now, after reading basically 11 chapters and what you might change about your answer to what is faith, or what questions you have just about that? So it was faith, it maybe equates for some of us belief. It informs our actions. Faith is about relationship. Faith is not absolute, someone said. Faith gives assurance and confidence. Faith is a risk. We have to agree to take that risk. I think that's what that was saying. Faith is outside or greater than humanity. Faith is personal. It's about trust. And were there other, that's right, so the next one was other definitions, Pam?
I think what came to me when you started saying from having read the 11 chapters and then this, I think faith is a journey.
Yeah.
And that's what this is all about, is looking at the process of the journey.
Yes.
Is it important to identify where we are in that process?
I think
Or just to look back and see where we've been?
all of that, you know, I think so what did Fowler say? He says it's about making meaning. It's a journey about making meaning of our lives. And how do we do that? And he's looking for across the board, how do people, typically healthy individuals, make meaning? And he determined that there is a pattern. that there's a way people make meaning of their lives. And there are pivot points, whether that happens intellectually or because of our physical development. This is why he brings in Piaget, right? And this is why he brings in Erickson particularly, to help us understand that there is, that this is documented, at least for the last 100 and so years. This is a fairly documented thing that is accepted in Western culture. Not been a lot of, there probably is a ton of research about other cultures and the way they learn and grow and change and assimilate and become, right? So, yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think faith is a commitment. It's not on the list.
Good. I like that, what rings real true to me, among others, is the risk. Because you put your faith in God and then you leave it with him and you risk having to sort out what happens if you don't get what you're asking for, or no, it's a risk to your reservoir of faith when you put it out there. And anyway, it's risky. And in terms of, I often think about when I talk to my children about something to pray about, that's a risk because I want them to know God's faithful and God hears and God responds. And if I recommend they pray about something and it doesn't, they're not at the stage yet where they can handle that and not lose all faith.
Yeah, so when we read more about the stages as Fowler has described them, and I mean, John Westerhoff did the work too, right, to sort of, he has 4 stages, and we'll talk about that later, but so this idea of how we can look at the world around us and make sense of it. In what way do we make sense of it? So that's partially what Fowler's going for. John went over and grabbed a Bible. I'm curious.
Well, you're mentioning Keating being the great cloud of witnesses, which put me in mind of Hebrews 12 and Hebrews 11 is the faith chapter. Faith is assurance of things hoped for, the conviction, so there's commitment again, of things not seen, and then the recitation of all the examples of that.
Yes,
Right. I didn't hear the first of what he said.
or you'll have to ask him to repeat it.
Well, could you repeat it? Where in the Bible?
Hebrews 11.
Okay, I couldn't hear you. Thank you.
So this is, if we, it's just a reminder, right? Like, I think we're gonna keep going back to this because I think whether or not you accept what Fowler has determined to be a stage of faith, whether you have experienced it, whether you have seen it in others, that'll just be so interesting for all of us to hear your experience with that. So thank you for that. So on that piece of paper that begins week 2, so faith as a word is how I started last week's stuff for us. So faith as a process, which several of you mentioned. Faith as a process, as a journey, as a process of meaning making, or also Fowler says, I don't know if any of you caught this, it's a part of God's plan for each of us. He considers this to be divinely ordered, right? Which is why he is and that he was, and that he's also in the great cloud of witnesses. He was a Methodist minister, a teacher at a Methodist seminary, right? So he wasn't just doing this work outside of kind of that umbrella of faith coming from God.
Now that's a real Calvinist doctrine, which we haven't talked about, but it's almost as if Fowler's saying, as a definition, it seems like faith is something we generate. And it's all, according to Calvin, a gift.
Again,
This is planted in us.
right, and I think that would be Fowler's way of seeing it. It's not super obvious. I think he doesn't use the word preordained, which Calvin would have used.
Mhm.
He uses a word like preposition is his word. So he avoids that argument perhaps, I'm not sure. But so we're pre-positioned.
So does gift get added to this descriptor of faith?
Does what get added?
Gift, what you just said.
I think it should be, I think that, I mean, that's a very strong doctrine and
It's not something we can produce in ourselves.
yeah.
Yeah.
We can nurture it.
That's an a priori argument, right? Like it exists before us and after us. And we can't. And so anyway, there's that. So, wonder how any of the rest of you would respond to that.
What I read was, felt like was more learned than innate. That it's, at least in the adolescent side of it, was more related to interactions, perception of self in relationship to perception of others, hence changing your perception of self to be more in sync with others, which feels like more of an external thing than an internal thing. And I don't know how that relates to faith because we haven't gotten there yet
Yeah,
in my mind, but I was reading more external than I was internal that you're speaking.
Yeah, I think it's dialectical, I think it's both.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm not saying it was right or wrong, that's just kind of what I
yeah,
heard when I read it.
yes.
Like
Something planted by
circumstances.
God, but we have a responsibility to develop it,
Cultivate it.
cultivate it, and to pass it on.
Yeah.
And life's circumstances shape so
Changes.
much of those turning points. In our
Absolutely.
I
lives.
think what they were describing is after a lot of study, these are the norms,
Yes, sir.
but there's a range from A to Z of everything in between.
You bet.
And it's influenced by how much you nurture it, how much our parents nurture it, and our community nurtures it, what the environment we're in, and so many other things. A lot more complicated than I ever thought.
But it all goes on regardless, whether we've been thinking about it at all. I mean, I think, if we- right, with, just like flowers grow, I don't know why I'm on the flowers thing today, but just like flowers grow, we know well, maybe if I don't plant the seeds, possibly they grow. I've seen your yards. I think they grow where you are. There's the possibility they might grow. But I don't know how that works. I'm not a botanist. I don't know. I mean, I know you need water and sun
And
and
you don't need deer.
soil. You don't need deer.
Right.
But so we know it, and so
Euthanasia.
I think of this process of development in much of that same way. Children have been being born and growing into adulthood for as long as we have records of. That has happened. Does it follow a certain pattern, which to your point, that's it. It does follow a certain pattern.
It's innate.
But,
There's the child who doesn't develop trust because there's no one to feed
Mhm.
on a regular schedule or to pick up and to love. And so consequently, I think that child is not going to grow in the same healthy way that the child who is nurtured does. And so that's in my opinion, herbs A to Z. You know,
Right.
they're gonna get somewhere, but is it gonna be a place where,
and no one's gonna get all of it every time,
Right,
all the
right,
way,
right.
right?
There's some innate things going on,
Right.
Right.
and that's the norm, so to speak.
Yes. And we try to fall within that range, which is his whole reason for setting up a statistical model, right? So that it falls between 2 points, right? And that makes it whatever the norm is.
And then Eleanor's to compound that, then you have brothers and sisters, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
Big
twins
time.
yeah.
that got equal amounts of nurturing in theory and are quite different.
There's Laura and I,
Yeah.
we're just alike.
We knew that.
I'd like to say that because I want to be just like her. But it's hard for a child, I think, excuse me, Kate, to trust God or an adult who is stuck in that infantile position where there is no trust in their life.
Yeah.
Now you got to trust something you've never seen or heard when you've not gotten the trust from the people you do see.
Right?
Excuse me,
And why you
Kate.
might be attracted to something else, like what might fill that void.
Drugs.
Drugs, so, you know, like, right, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's like Kate, and then.
No, but sometimes I've known people that have had so much religion and so much, put into their lives by their family that they say, oh, I'm done with this. I mean, you know, that they've been dragged into churches and Sunday schools and all these different kinds of things, and then they rebel against it. So-
Anything but that.
And, right, right,
Right.
you know, so there is the overload of that too, right?
Sure, I mean, I'm sure there is, I just, you know,
I mean, you're like,
Why
once
can't some-
exposed, do you think they come back? I mean, because they've been exposed to it? Or does it, if you're, oh,
I don't know, Kate, because you know, my dad is an alcoholic, but I'm not an alcoholic, right? So some of it's genetic, some of it's, personal, some of it's environmental, some of it, you know, like, it's very hard to weed out. So what we're gonna look for, right, are we're gonna look for these key points. We're gonna look for these key understandings of how faith might grow in a 0 to 2-year-old, and how in a 3 to 7-year-old, and how in a 7 to 12-year-old, and then 12, you know, we're gonna look at, maybe make those markers. And I once had a therapist tell me this, and I've probably repeated this before, a child who is bitten by a dog at a certain age, and then never has a way to process that dog bite, becomes afraid of all dogs. If that dog bite occurred in a park, the child might then become afraid of all parks if the trauma is undealt with. Then, if the man walking the dog had a beard, did you see where this is going?
Yeah.
So there are ways we treat trauma, whether we're talking about religion or whether we're talking about anything else, there are ways we treat trauma so that we can resolve it in some way, right? I'm no longer afraid of going to the park because I understand that that was a dog, you know.
To me, it feels like keeping a constant eye on the petri dish, because where I've been informs where I am,
Yeah,
and where I am informs where I'm going.
thank you. Yes.
So I gotta keep mine.
Yeah, I think that that's key here for this class, because, you know, we can discuss nature and nurture and church and all kinds of things, but if you can't bring it home, meaning into your own body, can't bring it home into your own experience, it's an intellectual exercise, which is completely fine. We can have all the intellectual exercises we want. That's fine.
But
Just
it
read
seems
the
to me
book.
that what they're describing, these three guys at this stage are describing, is based on a lot of statistical study and research. They're describing what the norms are that we were imbued with through nature, through God. And then there's all kinds of environmental and other things that make us deviate from that. Nobody's right on this norm,
Right.
but they got the numbers on the side that we're pretty confident that this is the norm. so to speak.
Yeah, I remember learning about this in terms of how would I construct religious education programs, right? And what we could see from other cultures and from this work, this need for some sort of initiation right for our young people, which is what Right 13 came out of. This, you know, we were a society that really didn't do a great job about, in this century, about having official rites of passage, which many other cultures have, right? You might have them in your family, right? We might have, everybody gets a driver's license. It's not exact, you know, the church, it used to be you get confirmed.
Yeah.
And it felt, you know, more or less. Right, right. So we know that, but that partially about learning about these stages is what I was getting at, is that has informed kind of where the holes are for us, you know?
I'm just gonna throw in too, something that I think has for me, I can look back and see the, extreme, forming was the Bowens thought about the place in the family. You know, where
the
you
family
are in the
systems
line
were-
of siblings and what, you know, I became a people pleaser, an adaptive child, a peacemaker. And this raging little angry child in here was, you know, not allowed to have anger. And, you know, those formed the person I was. And I look back at that stage in my life and realized how that held me back. I was stuck there for a long time. And I didn't ask for a big crisis in my life to bring me along, but I got one,
Mhm.
you know, and that.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. A huge crisis. No, but I mean, that's the way circumstances jar us out of where we are and bring us past it, eventually.
Yeah, and people are gonna be more or less interested in that, right? Like, I'm not sure that everyone is interested in that, like, you know what I mean? As you are interested in that sort of look at yourself, or what were the places in your life where you felt you had to, the story that you made up, the meaning that you'd made for your life no longer held up, right? That house that you built, that we do as we grow, no longer made sense. I can't believe that and that. Those are the points where we know we're moving from one, to use Fowler's language, right? One stage to another. We know that, like, this is the way we are, but now but how do I incorporate that? How does my life shift and change? What do I now believe that I didn't used to believe? Nobody believes in this room many things that you believed as a 2 and 3-year-old.
Well, that's right.
I mean, no,
God, yeah.
right? I mean, because you had a wide, now if you were in a cave, I'm certain that might not be true. But you've had all these life experiences, and where do you slot them to make meaning? Pam.
So when you were talking about confirmation and thinking of our own spiritual biography, you know, which is
Yeah.
part of the exercise.
Yeah.
Both Bob and I, remember that and felt like it was in a way a rite of passage. So I think that's really important for children to have those. And at the same point in time, I knew that I now had the responsibility of my faith, but it was still in a corporate environment, if that makes sense. You know, it wasn't personal until I had Curcio.
There you go. So you have, it's right.
So,
Very
but
good
I
point.
think those rituals or rites of passage in our church family are important.
They're used by God. I mean, you know,
Well, we hope. That was
That
you
was-
giving them the name.
that was used for her.
We hope they
You
have.
know,
that.
Well, I was thinking about confirmation because lovingly so, I have quite a few godchildren, adults, and some are adults and most of them were children. And then I realized that until they got confirmed, accordingly, their mistakes, well, you know, they were on me supposedly, and I thought, I have checked on those people, get confirmed. Just to get rid of responsibility. You know, I mean,
I never understood that responsibility.
well, I mean, really, until I thought, boy,
You're on target.
So Fowler has given names to the stages, which we are not gonna discuss until next week. We're not gonna go into the names that he gave them. But I think from what I was trying to give you was this. I've got the demerit sheet.
Yes.
I welcome all things today. I will-
Can we read that prayer?
You can have it. So, what I was hoping to do was to sort of get your, like develop, what the world says and what you think before we talk about what Father actually called them. So I have stolen from, the Unitarians, which I like the Unitarians, so I can steal from them. They have a curriculum for children around faith development. And, it's made it very easy to do some of this work, but their curriculum includes, faith as a process. And then, of course, in their tradition, they rewrote Fowler stages and they made it their own, which is terrific because it includes, they're talking about a specific faith in some ways, not faith in the way I'm teaching it, like faith in the sense of the Unitarian Universalist faith. So what's important for them to learn, right, as a UUA, what's important for you to learn? This tenet, this tenet, this tenet. We could say as Episcopalians, what is it important for us to learn? Are there any thoughts on that? Markers for us, and someone had mentioned confirmation.
I think via media is important, Episcopal.
Traits of speech and
Via media.
The via media, which means,
Yeah.
for everybody, does
middle
everybody
way.
knows what that means?
The middle
way. The middle way is the translation.
Oh, video, okay.
Yeah, that's the
Oh.
translation, and not to be confused with, we don't believe anything, we believe everything. That's not what it means. It means that all doctrine, dogma, tradition can be held in conversation, that there can always be conversation about it, and that our decisions come using tradition, which would be the other one, tradition, scripture, and reason, I would think would be a tenet of the Episcopal faith that we would want anyone growing up in the faith, I'm using that word as not in the way Fowler does, but growing up in this tradition, right? So we have the via media, scripture, tradition, and reason, the sacraments. Right? These are the things that I teach in a confirmation class or in a Episcopal 101 class. I think the primacy of Bible, of scripture as part of our faith tradition, the primacy of what has gone on before.
Centrality of Christ,
Yeah,
which is not in the UU faith tradition.
no, it is not. It is not, doesn't come up at all, but the universality of God and God's reach into humanity, right? Yes. Ours does include Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again.
That's at the top of the list.
No, I don't know, the ordering is different for each person.
Right.
Right?
So the Trinity would be,
The Trinity, the doctrine of the Trinity and the realization of the Trinity. What's in our catechism at the back of the prayer book, those are all central, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit.
and as Robin Williams said, pew aerobics.
Pure aerobics.
What?
Pure. Sit, stand, kneel.
A pew aerobics.
Yeah. sit,
Well, and
stand.
with schematic logos, I don't know. I had a priest that talked about that all the time.
I don't even know what that is.
I can't hear you, Kate.
Well, I couldn't hear you either, so. No. Schematic logos, and it was like, I always think of, when I'm thinking about that, I always think about, or because, it's love. I mean, it's instant love that you should have, that it's, everything that we do should be based on a love. So it's spontaneous. Thank you so much.
Spontaneous, yeah.
Yes, spontaneous love. Love of everyone. And that was, I remember that from being very young and having a priest tell me that, and long time wondering what he was talking about. And then finally,
What is the first word before logos?
Spontaneous.
wait a minute, now I can't say anything.
Spontaneous, yeah.
Spontaneous.
Spontaneous
That's
love,
not-
yeah.
No, it was a different word.
Different word, and now you would.
Okay.
Who wants to
We
say?
make you forget it.
Yes, no.
Schematic logos.
Say it again.
Schematic logos.
Schematic.
Dramatic.
Dramatic.
Logo.
Like
I never
ceremony?
saw it written down, he just said it, so I'm doing the best I can. And I was little. Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
All right, let's
that you
let
remember that.
Martin speak.
Thank you, that's a good way to.
We're gonna let
Okay,
Martin-
Martin.
The three-legged stool
Right.
Yes.
and continual revelation to me, real signposts in the Episcopal Church.
Thank you.
Allison.
And, continual revelation.
He's making it a force, of course.
Allison, can you
That's
remember
reason.
what you said about 60 seconds ago about the question in the back of our prayer book or
The
something?
catechism,
Yeah, but what was your point, the point you were making about that?
that those questions in the catechism contain the tenets of our faith.
Right,
Those are yes.
right. And where I come back to, not having been an Episcopalian as a child, but a Catholic,
Mhm.
I will tell you the first true and false question
Okay.
at the end of chapter 1 of the Baltimore Catechism. True or false? If a girl loves her radio more than she does her rosary beads, she is not going straight to heaven. That's a fact. I can bring a book.
I've seen it.
So,
Retune the dial.
so when I think about, what informed my faith early on, it was obedience. Or else, because these things are true and make a choice. Make a choice.
And you can think about now what you know about hold on to that. Because as we begin to look at where does that fall in whatever way we want to divide up a faith journey, where does that fall? That obedience as key. And if that's the first question, right, for the Catholic Church, I'm not a Catholic, right?
It wasn't the first question. The first was to know, love, and serve God in this world and be happy with him in the next. That was the first part of the
That's
Roman catechism.
No, I'm talking about the true false test.
Right, and I don't remember taking.
Yeah, at the end of that chapter, that's what that was.
Yeah.
I've learned I'm not ungrateful about that because the obedience that helped me to form then has helped me in later years a ton. I don't
Because you
regret
mixed
any.
it up with a little grace.
Yeah, I do.
There you go.
I know you're right about that, and I absolutely agree with that. But when you get to the end and you're a child and you're taking a test, that's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah, now 6 years old, sitting in the bishop's office, what is the most important thing you have learned from your catechism class? And I knew how to respond.
Yeah.
I was prompted.
Yeah.
Love and serve God in this world and be happy with them in the next. Okay, you pass.
Exactly.
You've never forgotten it.
That's right.
Well, those are all pretty good things. I was steeped in Catholicism myself. And it wasn't, I got married and at age 25, I thought, my husband is going to the Baptist church because he likes to listen to that preacher. I had never put my foot inside any of the church. I knew nothing about what they believed. I only knew what I believed was right. And that was pretty good, but I had to make a decision to open my mind and heart and learn about others. And it was a good education. And my visit with Dr. Swilly to tell him his Lord's Supper was sacrilegious. I was apologizing, but it just seemed sacrilegious to me. There was nothing holy about it. He said, honey, you're trying to go from one end of the broomstick to the go across the street to the Episcopal church. And I've been here ever since. And I thanked him in the later years for giving me that wonderful, loving advice.
Well, mine, of course, my father's family were Jewish, and I lived in the same town. And my mother's family were Episcopalians. her father actually was Roman Catholic, but they did send me to Catholic kindergarten in first grade because my grandfather Goldman thought that someone might take me otherwise. My mother kept assuring that would never happen, that they would bring me back, but the Catholics finally decided that, man, probably I was a little too confused to go any further than first grade. But, you know, and I told them, like at Temple, I said, everything is gonna be okay, because I did at least, we did 3 Hail Marys today in kindergarten. And so, and that's when my grandfather said, I don't think I'm gonna pay for this anymore. It was an amazing way to grow. And
Yeah.
I didn't know other people didn't do that. And yes, my Trinity is Godhead, and I'm the first to admit it. But, I went to Temple on Friday and I went to Sunday school and church on Sunday. And,
You had a good education.
well, I
I
mean,
was
you
about
know,
to say, yeah.
well, but the thing is, education for young people in the Episcopal Church. And besides putting a felt ark up on a board and adding animals to it, is about as far as we really ever got. But so a lot of the
We have
education,
the Seabury curriculum.
but then in the Jewish religion, I had a lot more education, maybe not so much in this is what you have to do, but in what the people did that were there.
Yeah.
I mean, they lived it. So that was, something I've always been grateful for, and it sort of put me over the top about certain things, but it was really sad when I found out that the whole world wasn't doing that. You know, that.
How old were you when that happened?
47.
You might still be working, you might
I'm still working on it. I'm still working.
That
That's gospel is going to be cake, yeah.
Anything else that, that you would like to share about this? So that's part of it. What I have is these case studies, just like 10 ones that kind of do illustrate a different place on the scale. And, I'm wondering, was that 2, 4, 6, 4, 6. I think if everybody would share with a partner, maybe, and if I just assign you a number, can you look at it with your partner? Then you'll read it, then you'll read the case study, we'll see how far we get. So what am I asking you for? I'm asking you to read through the case study, and you don't have to have the name yet. Stage 1, stage 0, what I'm asking you to sort of say is, if it doesn't say in here how old they are, some of these say how old they are. If it doesn't say how old they are, you might talk about that. You might say, well, they seem like they grasp some part of a developmental something. They lay beyond the hinge of moving into the next stage. It's more like, this is kind of, it's an unfair in a sense, because we have not talked about the names of the stages. Consider it a pre-test, if you will. You know how they used to give you that test in math, and then they would know whether they had to teach you multiplication tables? This is your pre-test. You can look at this, and then based on your own background, your own journeys, right? They're gonna be able to, I think, understand what's happening in the case study. The case studies are 2 or 3 sentences. It's not pages. You don't have to, there is no test, but I'm just trying to see how, where we all are on this. If it doesn't make sense, I would make it about anything you want.
Allison, I really hate to miss this, but I have an appointment.
Okay. Sarah, you have no partner now. No, I'm just.
Sharon, can you?
Is there no partner with Sharon? Okay. I need someone to.
Yeah, I was going to partner, with,
Judy, but, all right, so.
We can handle it.
Yeah. All right, you and Ginger, okay? Kate and Robert, John and Laura. Cora, though, will you go over and sit with John.
Good.
We have two extras here.
Well, I'm not sure what I have there.
We didn't get them.
It says case statements at the top. It's a back and a front.
Does anybody need one?
Yeah, you need more guys?
They're coming.
We got one. We got one.
Oh, you got plenty of that.
Anyone else?
Oh, actually, she can get us a number.
All right, we're gonna just spend 10 minutes on this.
What number?
How do we know what number it is?
I'm gonna, are y'all ready?
Yes.
I know. One,
Their number,
two,
okay.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Skip,
I'm Jerry.
okay, 6. Where's
6A and
that?
D.
You have 3.
We have 3.
Yeah, just pick one of the 6s that you like.
What is, we're 4, that's all we have.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No, John and Sally, if you also wanted to do number 8, you could.
Number 8?
Number 1 is very easy, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think 4 we just talked about, didn't we? Or not?
Yeah, it's pretty much what you were talking about, yeah. I don't think it's not rocket science, y'all.
I was, not too simple.
Yeah, it's very simple.
Well, ours is a little cheating. It's got an age in it.
Right.
Yeah, ours does too.
Yeah.
Oh, you're going? Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I have one more paper for you before you can do it. No, you have everything. He's always about that. I love picture. Makes me feel important. All right, let me know when y'all are ready by the showing of hands. You didn't like it?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of having to pick one.
Yes.
Given that
Yeah, you
I
can,
don't identify with that.
yeah.
Chelsea stays on there. I think she said that.
This is meaning how old they are. Based on the other stages of development, PJ and Erickson's, what can you determine about their facial development? All right, anybody still need time?
Right.
All right.
We don't think we need to go down.
Okay, so
Yeah.
not hearing any objections, I'm gonna start with, John and Sally, because they had one and some other one.
Well, number one is pretty, stage 1, early developmental phase. That's pretty easy. Case 8 is a little bit more complicated because, there's obviously a high degree of religious commitment there, but there's nothing about having struggled through conflicts or doubts or, so this person could be an 8.
At the end of the scale,
she could
right?
be up there and
Or-
resolve all this stuff, but also she could be in a middle stage.
Right,
Yeah,
kind of
because
stuck somewhere.
she talks about maybe in retirement, like going to seminary or something like that. But then she makes a statement, it's okay her husband doesn't do that much because she does enough for the two of them, which doesn't really sound, it just sounds like, okay, I'm just
Look at
filling
me.
up that box, yeah, for him or
That's a
something.
very good way to put that too. Yeah. There's an obligation
Yeah,
as
it's not,
opposed to a response.
yeah, it doesn't feel true.
Right? Like most of the time, I have obligations, absolutely, but I think it's more like, how am I gonna respond to God's call to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not hearing that as coming from that place.
He'd like to think she's a.
Yeah, she would like, well, don't we all wanna think
Yeah.
you're true? Yes.
I know better than that, though.
That's it's tempered with humility. Thank you. Okay, number 2.
Want to go or? Go ahead. Okay, so, we had a little cheat in there. She's 10 years old. So obviously early childhood, bordering on adolescence, and she could just be one of those mature early childhood, that is a little ahead into the adolescence. But,
And so what else would give you a clue other than the age? What in there is real indicative of children that they are able to parrot?
they like telling other people what they've learned.
What they,
So it's not personal, it's not that formal operational
Yeah.
thinking
yeah,
yet he talks about. It's the norms, the social norms of, that they're regurgitating.
right.
And a breaking away from parental, thumbs on by
Mhm.
sitting with their friend.
Yes,
Starting to sit
with their
away
friends.
from their parents.
Yeah.
Don't you remember that in church?
Mhm.
I do.
It was
I want to
good.
sit with you.
Yes, and then until we made a lot of noise in the back row with the rest of the youth group, then we had to go back. Or the priest said we could sit in the front row.
Right.
Or go to Bible school.
Yeah, all right. You guys have number 3.
Yeah,
All right.
well, we think this is pretty simple. Marriage in a family, parents never took her to church. She likes her friends, so we think, friends are very important. She decided to go with them and check it out when they went to church.
Getting a breakaway again, like yours from parental
Mhm.
influence and kind of express their own.
Thinking independent.
Yeah. What's another key in that scenario, in that case statement? About where she is in her faith development?
Well, she'd never been to church.
So she's not been to church yet.
Yeah,
Right.
this was totally
Yeah.
new for her. And I'm sure she had heard about it, but she wasn't getting anything at home.
Yeah, and that's one of the
So
tenets,
she's the babe.
right? And that's one of those tenets that when we talk about what's key for us, is worship, community gathering, and how that helps.
She only
form
got
us.
it through her friends back up and after that, she was beginning to get what it was like to be Episcopalian.
Yeah.
She liked that, so she'll keep going.
No, because I wrote the
May have touched
scenario.
on something that she, awakened something in her that she hadn't experienced before. You'd like to think of that innate part is there
Yeah.
and it spoke to her.
So that's an interesting, thank you for bringing that up, Jane. Like what comes from in us or from outside, what is just the way we are gonna mature? And how are things impacting how we mature? So it's the both and.
And there's a sense of searching in her personal thinking and feeling. She's searching. Which,
Yeah, that might be another piece of how our faith grows, or changes, or is a reflection of where we are. Number 4.
Okay, David's 14, he's 15, cradle Episcopalian. And he's starting to question, what it is to be an Episcopalian. Not so much what it is to be faithful or to follow Christ, but what it is to be an Episcopalian. It feels like it's, since they're saying he's 15, it feels like a less mature aspect of, these are questions that I would think you would ask earlier on or ask questions that were leading up to it. Rather than him just, because it seems like he's been going to church all along. It doesn't say anything about his parents. So whether he's going by himself or with a friend, I don't know. What do you think?
But he's asking why we do what we do.
Well, that was what I had said, was that he's got it down, he's got the up and downs down pat.
Yeah.
But why the up and downs? You know, I mean, like, but no, it's sort of like with the whatever you were talking about, the catechism thing, whatever, that it's,
You know,
he knows when he's supposed to be doing what, but he really doesn't
Understand the whys behind it.
understand the whys behind, the feeling behind it.
but yet there's a sense of what? At that last sentence, there's a sense of something.
But he's gonna figure
But
it
he's
out.
gonna figure it out. He's not saying, I'm done with all
You
of
know,
that.
I'll just keep getting up and down and going with it, you know.
Right.
he wants to-
No, but he's starting to make it personal,
Yeah,
you know,
He's
because
trying to
he's thinking
understand.
for myself.
Right.
You know, why do we do this? Why do I do this? Why is this important? So as part of his faith. So he's making it starting to make it personal.
and I think in some traditions, it's more, just as in some families, it's more or less easy to ask a question,
Right.
right? There are some families where one does not ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
One has learned that that is not what we do in our family. Secondly, there's churches where people are not allowed to question. That's not the nature of how they're constructed. It is the way it is because that's the way that it's always been. I mean, we do it to a certain extent, even though we like to think that we're kind of larger minded than that. Right, so he's beginning to see, he's going to be figuring out in that, is this a place where we ask questions?
But I think he felt comfortable, which
Very
was,
comfortable, yeah.
was the good part to me, was that he was comfortable in what he had been doing.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking, Pam and I went to, because difference that you said some families are not open to question.
Yeah.
Much like many churches are not, or faith systems, beliefs, whatever. Years ago, Pam and I went to BSF, which is Bible Study Fellowship, and it's run by the Baptist Church. And they would tell you exactly what you should believe. And there was no opportunity to ask questions. And as at the same time, we were doing EFM, which was. Oh, God.
You know, that's education for ministry. If you don't know what that means, it's just
It's
a
good.
program put through the church.
Taught it for years.
4
Yeah.
years.
But it's
Study.
built around asking questions and discerning what your beliefs would be rather than being spoon-fed what they are. And I was thinking about that earlier and how interesting that was.
Well, what made you do the two things at the same
Well,
time?
I guess, no, you know, I guess they weren't simultaneous. I guess they weren't simultaneous.
But enough to
But
make
they
them
followed.
work both ways.
But they followed one another, right? 'Cause
Right.
we did only 1 year of BSF. And, you know, I just had to kill myself if we keep going to this. And then we went to EFM and we found.
That was good.
So enlightening.
Thank you for that. Thank you. How about number 5? I guess we're timing. I'm aware of the time.
Go ahead.
This is Bob, who's a high school senior and has gotten his friends to come to church. He's in a place that he's teaching fifth graders. What
I know, I want
things
Bob to
happen?
live here.
Yeah, what happens to, why do bad things happen to fifth graders?
Yeah.
So I think he's at a point that he's not questioning anything. He's feeling good in where he is and.
He's got all the answers right now. doesn't he?
Yeah.
You remember that time?
You know,
Remember that time when you have all the answers?
his life's been pretty good so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when I read it, because of my background,
Yeah.
anybody who doesn't know me, I'm an ordained Episcopal priest, retired. I read servanthood in it. Immediately, you know, he starts out by bringing people to church. And then he goes into teaching the young about how God intercedes, and I'm going to put this into what he teaches, how God intercedes in the things of our life that we think are bad. whether they really are or not. Again, it's a servanthood to teach. And so when I read the fifth one there, I immediately went to servanthood. And I think part of that is that I was a servant in the church for a long time. I also had a 30-year sabbatical where I didn't believe in God, which means there is possibility with the right background and understanding to make quantum leaps in our faith.
And to go, I don't, the language is, I'm not trying to make it hierarchical, but to go from one thing to another, to move, to have experiences that will take you back to something else, so that the route is not like 1, 2, 3, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, depending on what we encounter in our life. That's a really good example, John. Thank you.
Yeah, and I end my servanthood as a priest in a prison and as a part-time chaplain, which gave me a whole different understanding of my faith.
Thank you.
You made me think of Paul's conversion. 30 years in the desert and then boom, now you're, I mean, it just made you, I'm not saying that's your journey, but.
I'm going, how many people in here have been to Cursillo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of us. Thank
My
God.
wife and I inherited a 15-year-old when both his parents died. And he was a troubled youth, I guess, a nice way to put it. And so I got up one Sunday morning and I got dressed and my wife looked at me. She says, "Those aren't your golf clothes." I said, "No, we're going to church." And she, picked herself up off the board. She had never lost her faith. She had, went to church on Sunday. I went and played golf. That was our routine. But the interaction with the people in that congregation made me doubt my understanding of who God is or if God is. And then I went to Cursillo, and Friday lunchtime I spent with a priest, and I realized that, and it was an instantaneous thing, that God loved me and had forgiven me already for the harm, because I turned people away from God. That was my job in this world, was to convince them that God didn't exist. And before that, I was a postulant. I was on my way to becoming ordained anyways. And I had done a lot of religious studies and scriptural studies. And if you want, you can take the Bible and confuse the crap out of anybody. And I did a really, really good job of that. And I didn't think, when I first went to Cursillo, I said, well, he's never going to forgive me for all the harm I've caused. And then that moment where I realized that he had, in fact, already forgiven me. And that he was calling me to do something else, which turned out to be, shepherding the lost.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
We're
great,
at the
John.
11 o'clock meeting. Do you
Which
want
is
to go
late
or do
then.
you want to
I'll
stop?
say this for a minute. So first of all, as I look back on all these, I'm struck by there's no distinguishment in these things, directly at least, between religion and spirituality, which I think is a big deal. And so we're kind of talking about both together. I think a lot of times the way you look at these things are colored by whether you're looking at one or the other. So I just want to make that, I guess we looked at B,
6B.
and this these folks were fairly new, they were young adults. I think that probably what they're going through is somewhat natural, common, in the sense that they really hadn't been churchgoers, or, there wasn't a religious side to them, but having a child changed the way they look at things, and that's something that happens, I think. And I think it also clearly affected not just their responsibility as parents, but it affected them too, because they began to get it. I think there's something deeper about getting to it that way to me, because you're making the choice. It's not something like you gotta do. It's not a normal progression that, oh, I'm this age, I need to know a little bit about religion, I need to go to church. I think they were beginning to kind of get into the spiritual side of all this, so.
And what I would only add is that Diana, who is now pregnant and thinking about wanting a spiritual home, she has a seeking that she was trained in religion. She did find it to be a negative thing for her, that to be told this is what you're supposed to think. And she said she was confused about her religious training, and she didn't want her child to be subjected to that kind of training. So they're going to now to some fellowship, and they feel welcomed there. And she's thinking, I'm not doing this just for the kid anymore. I'm doing it for me as well. So that was what
I think Irv's point and yours are very good ones. This is centered, because I stole liberally from the Universalist people. So it's definitely rooted there, right? Like in the faith tradition specific to that denomination. So, it does not say, like, did you have a spiritual experience? Like, my husband saw his grandmother's ghost when he was 8, and that totally informed his understanding of a religious life, a spiritual life for the next 10 years, right? So that didn't happen in the context of a church community. That happened. And I think many of us have had that, dreams, experiences, something that you felt in your heart, as John Wesley said, strangely warmed. You've had those experiences, and many of them don't take place in the context of a church, right? So I just tended to frame these this way. I think that's probably, we could talk for another hour about experiences outside of faith communities.
Let's not.
Jerry.
And number
you
7,
have
I'll
number
be
7.
quick. This is about John. He is the spouse of Kathleen in number 8, and is involved as she is. He's real happy with that, but that's just not his thing. He kind of goes to church a couple of times a month. He does like doing things like the food pantry, and he's thinking about taking one of those religious education workshops at the church. So I would guess I don't think you want to say apathetic about it, but he's very passive about his religious life, and he's letting his wife kind of do it for him and do it for the family, and he just makes appearances every once in a while in support of that.
Yeah, I think that's a stage many of us can identify with, right?
Yeah.
So, next week, I think, as you know, you're going to be reading you're going to be reading in part 4, and that's going to take. Fowler goes into great detail about each of the stages and some of the interviews that he's had with people that are in each of those stages. He'll be looking at his questions that he asked them, how he uses that information to inform, to support his theory about these ways that we move through the faith process. So he will bring up Piaget, he will bring up Erickson from time to time, he will bring up Kohlberg and talk about how that might be impacting this particular interview that he had. And then he takes that particularity in the interview and applies it more broadly. So that's really what part 4 is about. And I think it will help to shape kind of what is the way we go forward, in terms of what are the names of those stages and why he called them that, and what he noticed about things that could be clearly identified. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all for being so